Welcome everyone to another coffee tasting. I'm your host Aaron Taylor, and today we are tasting the Veranda blend by Starbucks. This is a blonde roast with notes of cocoa with a soft, subtle nuttiness. This is one of my favorite blends to brew at home. The reason why it's my favorite blend is because we get those smooth milk chocolate notes with that subtle nuttiness. We get the right level of bitters with that sweet milk chocolate flavor. If you guys are joining me for the first time, welcome to the live stream. If you guys are returning, welcome back. It is an honor to have you guys here. If you haven't had a chance to hit that like and subscribe button down below, go ahead and do so. That allows me to create more content for you guys and make this channel that much better. All right. So we like to brew our coffee 3 different ways on this channel, and the reason why we brew our coffee 3 different ways is so that we can explore the different flavor notes that we get out of the coffee from the different brew methods, but from the same cup of coffee. So with the French press, we're going to get a lot more of those sediments and a lot more of those oils, giving us much more flavor. And with the pour over, we're going to filter out some more of those sediments and a little bit of the oils. And with the Chemex, we're going to filter out much more of those oils and much more of those sediments, giving us a much smoother cup of coffee. So when you're brewing a pour over and a Chemex, you want to get your grinds completely wet just a little bit, and then you want to let your grinds bloom. And what that does is it allows the air that's trapped in between each of the grinds to rise up to the surface, allowing the air to escape so that you're not overbrewing your coffee. Because what can happen sometimes is we pour too much water on top of our grinds, and that air, instead of rising to the top, gets trapped at the bottom, and it slows down the brewing process, making for a more bitter cup of coffee. It's going to impact the flavor. So making sure you allow your coffee to bloom at the very beginning is very important to making sure that you get the right consistent flavor of the coffee, and that your pour over doesn't come out too bitter. So with the Veranda, this is a blonde roast, and this was introduced in around like 2015. And Starbucks came out with the blonde roast because around 70% of their customer base thought that the medium roast was too dark. And so this is their call to make a more pleasant, drinkable cup of coffee for those who like a lighter roast cup. And I actually prefer this coffee, not because I like a lighter roast cup of coffee, just because it's really smooth and has some really great flavors. And so today we're going to experience those flavors on the pour over, the Chemex, and the French press. So with this particular cup of coffee, I think my favorite brew method is going to be the French press. The reason why is because this is a lighter roast cup of coffee, has those smooth, more mellow notes, and so that French press is going to bring forward those flavor notes, make it a little bit more bolder than it really is, but we're going to really get those milk chocolate notes primarily. With the Chemex, it's going to be very similar to the French press, but we're going to have much more subtler notes. Not going to be as tense as it is on the French press. And with the pour over, we're going to see a little bit more of those nutty notes, and we're going to see a little bit more of the bright citrus flavors that might be in this coffee as well. All right, perfect. So while we wait for the French press and the Chemex to continue to brew, we are going to try the pour over on the Veranda blend. So we're going to go ahead and smell the coffee first, and we're going to try and get those aromas. So immediately when I smell it, I'm definitely getting a lot of those nutty notes that we get. It's very mellow and soft on those nutty notes, but we're definitely getting those nutty notes, and that's because of the pour over. With the pour over, the milk chocolate, those bitter flavors aren't going to be as predominant as they are on the Chemex or the French press. Okay, so with this coffee on the pour over, we're getting hit with like a very soft, bright mellowness on the sides of our tongue. And those are like the citrus flavors and also with the slight nuttiness as well. So it almost gives it like a soft, roasty flavor. And then as it washes away, we get that milk chocolate sweetness in the center of our tongue paired with those that leftover, almost, I would almost say like a hazelnut flavor. Really good. So on the pour over, we get that initial bright citrus punch on the sides of our tongue, but it's not super intense. It's really mellow. And then as it washes away, we get those milk chocolate sweet flavors, and then those nutty flavors linger on with that milk chocolate. Really, really good. Excellent. So with the French press, what makes this different is the fact that there's no paper filter involved in this. And what that does is it gives us more sediment. So when you introduce the paper filter to your filtering process, the paper filter catches a lot of the sediments and then even absorbs some of the oils that passes through. So with the French press, we're getting a lot more of those sediments and even more oils as well than you would in a pour over. And so that's going to impact the flavor, giving us more of an intense, bold flavor. And it's going to bring out some more of those bitters. And so in this case, we have those milk chocolate bitters. So we're going to get more of those milk chocolate flavors. And that bright, those bright flavors with the nuttiness is going to kind of take more of a back seat. Yeah, so with the French press, it's definitely not as intense on the initial sip for the brightness. We definitely do still have that bright, almost citrusy flavor at the very beginning, but we mainly get those nutty notes right off the bat for the French press, and then as it washes away, we're really left with that intense milk chocolate flavor. And on the French press, it's much more intense, and much more bitter than it is on the pour over. So with the pour over, when we get that milk chocolate wash left over, it's almost sweet because it's not as bitter as it is on here. With this, we're getting a lot of those bitters, so it leaves like a heavy feel on your tongue, almost like as if it's left like a heavy sediment wash, and you have that strong lingering bitter flavor. So it's really really good, especially for a blonde roast being able to bring out some more of those intense flavors and allowing for a lighter roast to have a little bit more robustness. Really good. So with the Chemex is a triple paper filter, and so what's happening here is we're actually absorbing more of those oils, and we're getting very to little to no sediment at all. It's going to be a very, very clean cup of coffee. It's going to be a very balanced cup of coffee as well. It's going to be very similar in flavor to the French press, except those flavor notes that we get on the French press are going to be toned down, and we're getting less oils and less sediments. So very, very clean cup of coffee, very smooth. The blonde roast is going to be very light on the Chemex. So we're hardly getting any of those bright notes that we got on the pour over, and we still got a little bit of those bright notes on the French press, but not nearly as predominant as the pour over, but we still got a little bit of those bright notes. But on the Chemex, those bright notes pretty much are non-existent. It's still slightly there, but it's much more mellow and soft. It's hard to catch. But we're definitely getting a lot more of those nutty notes. And then with the as the palate washes away, we're left with that sweet milk chocolate mouthfeel like we got on the pour over. And then the reason why it has that sweet flavor is because the initial sip of our coffee has that intense bitter flavor, and as it washes away and we're left with that milk chocolate mouthfeel, it's less bitter than the initial bitterness of the coffee, and so it gives it that sweet flavor contrast to the initial sip. And so as the palate washes away through your mouth, we start to get that sweet sensation, and it's only because it's in contrast to the bitterness that you were experiencing a couple seconds ago at the very beginning of the sip of the coffee. And so it's not necessarily sweet, but it's sweet in contrast to uh, the first part of the sip. Really, really good. I like the Chemex a lot on the Veranda blend. The reason why I like the Chemex a lot on the Veranda blend is because we're not getting a whole lot of those citrus notes. It's primarily featuring those nutty notes. We're getting a lot of that hazelnut flavor, and then we get that sweet milk chocolate finish because as the bitterness dies down and that milk chocolate wash takes over the tongue, it gives you that sweet sensation because the contrast between the initial bitters and the lingering bitters is much more smoother. So really, really good, you guys. So with the Veranda blend, we're going to learn a little bit about the history of Brazil. So Veranda blend is a mixture of Colombian coffee and Brazil. And with Brazil, it first obtained its coffee in the early 18th century. And it was first planted in 1727 by a gentleman, Francisco de Melo de Melo Palheta. I've been looking at this light too much, you guys. It's blinding me. So Francisco de Melo Palheta was the first gentleman to pretty much plant coffee in Brazil, and it pretty much blew up. And Brazil is the one of the main exports. They produce a third of the world's coffee production. So it is one of the world's largest coffee producers. Um, and so with that, we have when coffee first made its way into Brazil in the early 18th century, Francisco de Melo Palheta first planted his coffee in 1727. And so with that, the oh man, what are they? What's the country called again? Oh, okay. So with the country of Portuguese has been trying to obtain coffee beans for the longest time from the French and the from their border neighboring borders. And the governor of the French Guiana was reluctant to give them some beans. So they have been trying for the longest time to acquire beans and cultivate coffee for themselves. And they eventually sent Palheta to French Guiana to um, uh, settle a border dispute. And when he was over there settling the border dispute, legend has it that he seduced and had an affair with the governor's wife. And when he left and came back to Brazil, he brought with him a bouquet of flowers. And in that bouquet of flowers was smuggled a couple coffee beans that the governor's wife had put in the bouquet for him. And so that is a little bit about how coffee made its way from the French to Brazil and how the French were reluctant to give up their coffee, and Francisco Palheta had to go over there and settle a border dispute, and in the guise of a border dispute was able to smuggle some coffee beans, unroasted coffee beans, back to Brazil so that they could start cultivating in Latin America and become one of the largest producers of coffee today. So really, really cool. And then, so now that we learned a little bit about how coffee made its way from the French to Brazil, it was coffee really blew up in this area. It became one of the main staple crops in the area. It was, they have the proper land to grow. They have nutritious soil, being able to grow like high quality beans. And then in the 1840s is when the demand of coffee peaked and production started booming. And we had Italians migrating just to work on coffee farms. And so we have people migrating to Latin America just specifically to work on these coffee farms because that's part of their culture and dedication, and that's what they're all about is coffee. And so we have the coffee boom in the 1840s, and then then we have an export decline in the 1950s. So we have coffee was booming in Brazil all the way up until the early 1900s. And then as we get closer to the 1950s, we start to see an export decline and a decline in production in Brazil because other parts of the world are being able to easily produce coffee and grow coffee themselves. So we're starting to see coffee being grown in different parts of the world. So the demand of coffee coming out of Brazil is starting to lower. So they're not able to export as much coffee as they were. But with that being said, they are still to this day what the third largest. They produce one third of the world's coffee production, even after their decline of coffee exports from different coffees from around the world. And so that's how main staple Brazilian coffee is and how important it is. Is even though they were one of the main exports back in the day, and their exports started to see a decline in the 1950s. Even with that being said, they are still the producer of one third of today's coffee. So super cool. We'll learn a little bit about Brazil, their history with coffee, and how coffee made its way from the French to Brazil through a border dispute love affair. So super cool, you guys, how we got to learn a little bit about Brazil's history through the Veranda blend, one of my favorite coffees, light roast. My preferred brew is the Chemex. The reason why I prefer the Chemex is because we get those much more subtle citrus notes with the milk chocolate sweetness. And with the pour over, we get a lot more of those bright notes. And with the French press, we're getting those intense chocolate bitters. So it's not as, doesn't taste as sweet as the Chemex. So my favorite is the Chemex, you guys. Thank you guys for joining today's coffee tasting. I hope you guys enjoyed. I will see you guys this Tuesday as we explore another local coffee shop. Have a great day, and I hope your coffee was delicious.